So I call myself a public historian, which is not a phrase that people always know what that means. I've been using it for over 10 years, and I think now it's becoming a bit more common. But for me, my job is to be sort of a middleman or a mid person between uh, scholars who are doing really important scholarship and work and creative thinking, and who are perhaps at the forefront of new ideas and new approaches. Um, and I see myself as perhaps having a role to be a middleman of a sort, but actually, helping to facilitate maybe a conversation between those scholars and the public or publics. There are lots of different groups and subgroups within our broader public, some of whom love history, some of whom really didn't enjoy it at school, and as soon as they were old enough to leave it behind, they did. So a lot of my work is trying to bring those people back, trying to get people for whom history is boring or scary or irrelevant. They don't care. Why should they care? They've got, other concerns and worries in their life. But I meet a lot of people who I think regret leaving history behind when they were very young and think, oh, I wish I had, sometimes they say, I didn't enjoy it at school. I wish I had different teachers. But that's not always the problem. Sometimes you're not old enough to appreciate what history can be. Sometimes it takes a bit of life experience. So I see myself as part of that conversation that's happening between scholars and the general public. And I obviously try and contribute new ideas and new knowledge sometimes myself, but mostly I'm trying to either translate what might be considered to be quite difficult, perhaps intimidating, the depth of research that can be done, that sometimes the way it might be written might be a bit off-putting for people. So I try and make things a bit funny or a bit easier to digest. But a lot of the time, actually, I'm trying not to speak for academics and scholars. I'm trying to allow them to speak. I'm trying to give them the space to speak. That's why my podcast, You're Dead to Me, that I make with my great colleagues, and the BBC is very kindly supporting. That's why I really like it, because the historians get to speak for themselves, and I just ask the silly questions and make sure everyone's having a nice time. So I think my attitude has changed a bit over the years. I think I used to do a lot of work where I was translating what felt to me like difficult ideas for a general public, and now I prefer to be almost someone who's sort of there to support two other people, two other sort of parties talking to each other, and to sort of make sure that they're able to speak to each other. So I'm a bit more of a hostage negotiator. Is that the phrase? I don't know. Maybe that's not it. But yeah, making sure that I'm not doing the speaking for others, I think is what I'm trying to do more of. The way I would separate popular history from public history is, from my mind, popular history often caters to people who already like history. So these are books, documentaries, podcasts, a sort of an output that is well written, is well communicated, that is enjoyable to read or to engage with, but which fundamentally is probably speaking to people for whom history is not scary and off-putting or difficult. And so I think when you're doing popular history, I think you are probably talking to an audience who are not going to go, oh no, I don't like history. That it's going to be a different relationship. Whereas I think public history can be all of that. It can absolutely be all of that. I'm sure many of my many of the people who read my books or people who listen to our podcast on the BBC, I'm sure plenty of people are like, yeah, I love history. It's great. But the thing that I'm always trying to bear in mind is that public history, I think, is about starting perhaps with children and ensuring that they never get switched off, that they never get to that point of feeling that history is not for them. And then it's also about reaching out to people perhaps in their teens or in young adulthood who feel like, what's this got to do with me? And saying, well, actually, it's everything. It's politics, it's culture, it's fashion, it's food, it's sport, it's everything. And then, of course, then also reaching those people for whom they left history behind 20, 30 years ago, and saying, it's not too late. So I think of public history as a series of different conversations. It's an umbrella, but actually it's a lot of different conversations with different audiences and different groups who have different educational levels, different ages, different backgrounds, different desires, different fears, and trying to reach all of them in their own way, and to make the subject of history, which of course is a very complicated and multifaceted subject, but to give them the opportunity to say, yeah, actually, this isn't scary, and this can be for me, regardless of who I am. So I think popular history perhaps goes out to people who are like, yeah, I like history, put it in my hobbies list. I think public history should be for everyone. On the one hand, I think it's great there are so many places out there that are delivering enjoyable, accessible history content, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or podcasts or video games or TV drama or movies. These are all, I think, part of that wider cultural edifice of history as something that the public or publics can consume and enjoy and think about. But at the same time, obviously, all historians will tell you there are risks and dangers to the way history can be used. It can be manipulated, it can be politicized, it can be weaponized. And historians are trained not just to know facts. We don't just show up at university and then get told some things. We're trained to think, and we're trained to assess and to critique and to dismantle and say, well, hang on a minute. Why do we think that? What's that based on? Let's go back to the original sources and look at them again. And every society will change the kind of questions it asks of the past. The past and history are different. The past happened, it cannot be changed. History gets rewritten every day. That is always changing. And so to study history at a university like Royal Holloway is to learn how to think for yourself, to learn how to think about what is this subject, what's it for, what purpose does it have in society, but also, to sort of challenge received ideas and think, well, do we still think that? Is that still the case? Are we missing some key piece of evidence? So I think it's very easy to make a podcast. Actually, that's not true. No, it's never easy to make a podcast. Podcasts are hard work, but I think it's not necessarily intellectually challenging to make a show or a podcast or write a book or whatever, where you're just putting out stuff you've read elsewhere and going, this is what people say, and here's what that is. And that's a lot of my work is sort of that, summarizing what other people have said. But obviously, the work of a historian often is to sort of go back to the original sources, the original evidence, and really reassess it and try and figure out, have we got this wrong? Are there missing elements here? Are there people who've been left out of this history? Are there communities who haven't had their stories told? Why does this piece of evidence survive but not others? Who allowed that to happen? Or is that just purely an accident? Has the government of the time decided this is important and they've burned something else? Or is it just, stuff gets collected and popped in an archive somewhere and you stumble on it 400 years later? To be a historian is to be a detective and to be inquiring and inquisitive, but also critical. And it teaches you those skills. And I think we see, obviously, now we are living in a culture where technology is going so fast in these incredible developments with ChatGPT and AI and the ability to manipulate and create artificial images. I saw one this morning, an image of Donald Trump being arrested by various police officers. And it's a very impressive fake that a computer has generated. And a historian doesn't necessarily know how to look for that. I certainly don't have the skills to judge the quality of a Photoshop, but a historian naturally is critical of something that they're presented. They will go, where's this from? What's the source? Can I trust this? And those are skills that you learn as part of that degree. So you're not just learning facts, you're not just learning stories, you're learning how to stop and assess before you come to a conclusion, which I think is a really important skill, not just for being a historian, but in our society. The historians whose work I really admire are the ones who really write very well. They're very good communicators. They have a very elegant style. They know how to share a story, how to tell a story, how to grab a reader or a listener. They are naturally good at communicating their ideas to other people. And I think those skills come probably not just from reading history books, but from reading novels and fiction and poetry and watching TV shows and listening to really good drama. I think good historians are good writers. And I think good writers are probably good readers, people who read a lot and they read widely and they are interested in all sorts of stories and all sorts of techniques for telling those stories. Um, I often say that historians and comedians have a lot in common. And that's why I really love Making You're Dead to Me, because these two strangers often 10, 15 minutes in go, hang on a minute, you're just like me. But communication, is a huge part of what historians do and what comedians do. So I think learning to read widely and to appreciate good style and good expression and clarity of ideas, you can get that from novels and from plays and from movies and telly and all sorts and journalism. You don't just have to read history books. So I think it's, obviously read as much as you can as a historian anyway. But I think there's a lot to be said for learning how to read and write from other people who do it, not necessarily with history in mind, but just, they're trying to get their ideas across to someone who doesn't share their brain. And I think the exciting thing about where we live right now is that every day there are great books being published and there are great podcasts being made and there are really good, we have social media where you find loads of experts, loads of people who are scholars who've specialized in one thing and they're just there and you can talk to them. And, when I was 20, which is a long time ago now, half a lifetime ago, but when I was 20, if I wanted to know something, I had to go to a library and I had to look it up and it took ages. Now, if I want to know something, I go on Twitter and I ask the historian. I follow about 10,000 people on Twitter. Probably about two-thirds of them are historians. I can get any question answered in about 45 minutes because the person I will think to ask will either know the answer or they'll know someone who knows the answer. There is this incredible community of scholars and experts who are passionate and generous and happy to help and talk, and support. And I think if you're a history student, if you're trying to learn your subject, if you have genuine passion for it, and if you reach out to someone on Twitter and say, hi, I'd just love to know more about this subject, where might I look? I would be very surprised if you don't get a really kind answer coming back saying, try this, try that, read this, or I've written a blog about this or this book. I've found an incredibly supportive community online, scholars around the world who are so eager to help. And I think that's a wonderful thing. So there are fantastic books in all the, bookshops out there. There are really, great new projects coming out. But I think the amazing thing is that because of social media, you can talk to anyone about anything. And if you approach it, be polite and respectful and understand that people are busy. But I think if you are in the right, using the right sort of phrasing and just saying, hello, sorry, I know you're busy, but if you wouldn't mind, I'm sure you can get almost anything answered. So I would make more of that, actually. I would say, there's this amazing resource out there, and that resource is people who are fantastically passionate and knowledgeable. And if you give them the respect that they're owed in terms of, not assuming that they're going to have to help you, but just asking politely if they wouldn't mind, I think most people would. And what an amazing thing to be able to have. I think my main goal as a public historian is obviously to get people to not hate history. that's sort of number one on the list. The thing I'm trying to do more of is to make the past messy and to explain that for all the things we do know, there are so many things we don't. And that's not a bad thing. And that's not a disappointing thing. That doubt and slightly skeptical, like, can we trust this, is a really important thing to have in our lives. And certainly when we think about the past, I think certainty is often a lot more dangerous than being able to appreciate that perhaps we don't have all the evidence we would like. So while a lot of the time on podcasts or in books and so on, you are trying to tell a story and you might try and simplify things so that people can follow, and you might say, well, look, this happened, then maybe this happened. I really like the ability, certainly in podcasts, certainly in books and so on, to have footnotes or segues where you go, yeah, but really, did that happen? Honestly, how do we know that? Who wrote that down? It was 100 years later on. They weren't even alive at the time. Are you sure we trust them? All those aspects I think are really important. And I think public history, I think, should make space for doubt. I think it's a good, healthy thing to, from time to time, allow ourselves to enjoy a story and then dismantle it simultaneously, and to have those two oppositional ideas in our heads, and to say, on the one hand, this is the story of Boudica, the great queen of the Iceni, and on the other hand go, yeah, but do we know anything about her that isn't from a Roman source 50 odd years later on? Those two things, you can hold them in your head at the same time, and they're both valuable and they're both interesting. So yeah, the main goal, make history fun and accessible. But if I'm allowed to, I will try and make history messy.